we're resuming meeting number 27 still of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, which started on April 13th. We suspended the last meeting. Today is June 1st, 2021. And today's meeting, like we have been usually, is meeting in hybrid format. I believe everyone is participating virtually thus far, and the room is available for those that may want to sub in, but I don't believe there are many subs at this point scheduled for today. So I'd like to just tell everybody that, just give you a couple of reminders, make sure your interpretation is selected. Make sure you mute and unmute yourselves. And if you want to raise a point of order, then make sure you use the toolbar to indicate, if you want to raise a point of order, just unmute yourself, say you have a point of order. But if you want to speak to that or the debate on the floor, then raise your hand in the toolbar below. I did want to let you know that there has been a strain on our support resources. So you may have heard from your various whips that things are very tight, not just for our committee, for all committees that are taking place. We have many people from our support teams that are not available right now, and so that includes interpretation and perhaps others as well, a part of the technical teams. So there will be a hard stop at 1 o'clock today, and that's been agreed upon by all the whips of the committees of the parties. And I believe all committees will be limited to the 2-hour time. And I'll keep updating you on that. I don't know if it's just for today or if that's something that we may have to deal with for some meetings to come. But where we left off last time is that a sub-amendment was presented by Mr. Blakey. And Mr. Blakey had the floor at the time, and Monsieur Terrien had his hand raised. So we could go back to Mr. Blakey if you want to refresh our memory on your sub-amendment. I'm sure everyone has it in front of them. And in case somebody doesn't, maybe this is a good time for you to let me know if you don't have Mr. Blakey's sub-amendment so that we can forward it to you again. Does everyone have the sub-amendment? Okay. All right, so we are on that sub-amendment, and after Mr. Blakey, we have Mr. Terrien on the list. So Mr. Blakey, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So as you say, just for the benefit of the committee, I'll recall that the sub-amendment that I've proposed really just puts some time limits on reporting back on the issue of prorogation to ensure that it does happen and that it happens in a timely way. And I think that if we do pass this sub-amendment and then the amendment and then the main motion today, then effectively we're in a position to perhaps even begin studying C19 as early as Thursday. What I think we'll need a little bit of time to do is to discuss how we can proceed to conclude the report on prorogation according to the timeline in the sub-amendment. And I do have some thoughts about that, but I'm anxious to see if we're going to get to that resolution. And so I hope that if we do, Madam Chair, that we might then make some time in order to talk about how we can finalize a report a week from today. And of course, I think we all understand from last day that there is a draft that's already prepared of the report. If the Prime Minister does indeed appear, then that would be the only thing that needed to be added, as I hope he will. But in the event that he doesn't, we will have a report that will include that omission and a process where the committee can ensure that we're voting on everything that needs to be voted on to get that report done, and get in whatever the committee wants to get in about this journey that we've been on together. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
So you are absolutely correct. I mean, it does present some challenges in terms of the timeline. It is a timeline crunch. We would have to, if it was to pass, we would have to quickly figure out how we are going to accommodate getting everything done within that time frame. If we also get to that point, like I said, you're correct. We have the report up to this point, prepared and translated, and that can be circulated to all of the members if we reach that point. Mr. Therrien.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's be frank. The Liberals' filibuster has lasted for more than 2 months, and the heart of the issue was whether or not the Prime Minister would appear. In Ms. Vecchio's motion, there were also several other points. Now, Mr. Blakey's motion was extending a hand. He was saying all we'll request is the presence of the Prime Minister and the rest will drop. And that was a step in the right direction. Now, the crux of the issue was always the presence of the Prime Minister. Now, we've gone through more than a 2-month-long filibuster because of this. Now, I don't want to start speaking forever on this, but I want to point out that if we're going to do intelligent work regarding the prorogation, and Pablo Rodriguez's appearance really represented a turning point in this, as long as we cannot hear from the Prime Minister in this committee, it will be impossible to wrap up this study on prorogation. Now, is there anything that's being hidden? I don't think so. Do we have time? Would the Prime Minister have time to spend an hour with me? Well, I think that he's beholden to do that because we are in a democracy. I understand that he is the Prime Minister. However, his responsibility, some of his responsibility, is to come and explain a step he took. That is to say, he prorogued Parliament, and there were a lot of issues to resolve at the time. Now, we've heard the opposition parties. The Liberal Party has filibustered. We all understand that they could not see any point in the Prime Minister coming. Now, I've heard in the past the Prime Minister within a committee, and I think that he could shed some interesting light on this. This isn't an inquisition. We're not asking for his head. We don't want to turn him into Joan of Arc. All we want to do is ask him some questions. We want to ask him to explain what it was that he did when he was proroguing Parliament. I cannot conceive of the possibility of, after such a long filibuster, that he wouldn't come. He's being invited for an hour. The opposition parties have taken a big step forward, and now we're being told by the Liberals, listen, if he comes, fine, but if he doesn't, well, we'll just mention it at the end of the report. That's not being serious. Do you know, we're not fools. And what I find surprising is this. I see my NDP colleague embracing this idea. I mean, this is extraordinary. I've been in politics for 8 years. And I could tell you, I've never seen a shift in position like that one. I've never seen this. I'm truly impressed. So my NDP colleague is saying, well, that's a good idea. And not only that, he's setting a deadline for the discussions on prorogation. And we've been blocked from doing this for more than 2 months because of a Liberal filibuster. The filibuster's over, and what's happening? We're being told, okay, let's just get this wrapped up by June 8th. I mean, this is a joke. We have been blocked for 2 months from doing our work, and now there's this supposed resolution. But actually, the knife is being held to our throats. We're being told we have to get this wrapped up by June 8th. Listen, June 8th, that means we have today, Thursday, and next Tuesday. That's it. we have to discuss Mr. Blakey's amendment, and we have Mr. Lauzon's amendment, and we have Mr. Blakey's motion. And that's if none others are brought forward. But we're being told, okay, stop fooling around. June 8th is the deadline. I mean, this is insulting, quite honestly. It's insulting in terms of the work that we've done. It's insulting in terms of how serious we've been about our work in the past in this committee. From the very outset, we've gotten along. We've been amicable. We've worked hard together. We've worked well together. We've had good discussions. And now we're just being told, well, that's enough messing around now. Wrap it up by June 8th. On the pretext that now we have to make room for Bill C-19. Well, I'm telling you right now, there is no question that I am going to give up intelligent work on the pretext that a few members are telling us that we have to wrap this up by June 8th. What does that mean? It means that we won't have wrapped up by June 8th. Are we going to have to extend the meeting? Yes. But what if we do extend our meetings? Can we be supported by IT during that length of time? Does it mean we're going to have to push other committees aside? Does it mean that we're going to get to the end of the session and other committees won't be able to sit because other committees also have work? But really, the gun is to our heads and we're saying June 8th. Quite seriously? I am not able to conceive of having a knife held to my throat like this on the pretext that Bill C-19 is coming. If Bill C-19 were so important, and I'm not saying it's not important, but if it were, perhaps the Liberals shouldn't have been filibustering for 2 months, because that is the problem. And here we are, being told that we have to get this wrapped up within a week so that we can get through all the parliamentary work that we have to do. And I still have many questions, and I want those answers. On the 18th of August, there was prorogation. And Mr. Morneau resigned. And I put the question to Mr. Rodriguez, what happened on August 17th? He wasn't able to answer me. Number 3 in the government resigned. I don't know what's happening. Shall I continue? Is it getting 3? Mr. Terrien? I think all is good. You can continue, Mr. Terrien. Okay, I apologize if something happened, but I can continue, you're saying? There's no problem at all from our end. Go ahead. Thank you. So, Mr. Rodriguez said he didn't know what happened. Seriously? Seriously? This was so important. It was so important that he come before us. And he tells us with a straight face that he doesn't know what happened on August 17th, and then on August 18th there was prorogation. I'm sorry. Sometimes I have the feeling I'm being taken for a fool. Am I saying that Mr. Rodriguez was lying? No. But I'm saying that he was missing something there that was very important that we think about, that we'll be able to think about in terms of prorogation. And so they shut down on August 18th. A month later, Parliament started. Mr. Rodriguez said, well, that's normal. We had to do consultation studies. We had to write the speech from the throne, etc. And then experts come before this committee and tell us that a prorogation can last simply 3 days. You can prorogue on Thursday and start again on Monday. So we heard explanations from Mr. Rodriguez, but I'm sorry, they weren't accurate. And now I'm being told, Alain, you have to be satisfied with Rodriguez's visit in terms of the study on prorogation. Now, Ms. Duncan has often said that she is a doctor and that she often tells us that you have to be serious in your thinking and you have to be reflective. But what I'm telling you, without necessarily being an expert, is that you have to do intelligent work. And in order to do intelligent work, you have to go to your sources. You have to go to your reliable sources, and you have to be able to undertake proper scientific work, as Ms. Duncan has said about other studies. And without that, we cannot reach any conclusion on why prorogation happened. Mr. Rodriguez came before us in this committee, and he told us things that weren't quite accurate, but also that were missing very important points. Now, if the number 2 in government comes here and isn't able to shed any light for us, then I'm telling you there's a problem, and there's a serious problem. If the number 2 can't tell us, then we need number 1. And what will that be? Listen, it won't be an inquisition. We have the utmost respect for our institutions. And if we have him here for 1 hour to ask him questions, we'll do that while respecting all the rules, while being respectful. And I'm convinced that the Conservatives are aware of this, that they will do the same, as will the NDP and the Liberals. So what is there to fear? And why would the NDP fear the appearance of a prime minister? And what does the Liberal Party fear? You know, we're not executioners. We simply want explanations. And we want to know what happened. We want to know what happened when a rare tool was used. It is our responsibility to shed light on this. That's what our constituents expect. And when others say that their constituents haven't heard about prorogation, well, I'm sorry, but my constituents have heard about the We Charity affair. They have heard about this. Now, if you're going to draw a line between the both, if you're going to make any sort of correlation or connection, well, you have to be able to see the data. You have to be able to see what led to the next point. Now, there was the We Charity affair, and that happened at the same time as something else. In other words, prorogation. I don't know if Ms. Duncan agrees with me, but that's an association. Now, for it to become a correlation, a cause and effect statistically, well, you have to be able to prove that one led to the other, one influenced the other. In other words, was prorogation caused by the We Charity scandal? Well, in order to be able to draw any conclusions, you need information, you need an analysis. And as long as we haven't been able to undertake that analysis, well, we're going to be basing our study simply on association without knowing exactly whether one led to the other. Now, if Ms. Duncan and the Liberal Party agree with what I'm saying, then that means that there are elements that people don't want to show us, people don't want us to see, and that worries me. Because we are in the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, and we have a reputation. We've always taken our work seriously. And so I'm extending my hand, and I'm telling you, do you want us simply to have a botched analysis, or do you want us to be able to go to the heart of this? Do you want us to do this in a structured, intelligent, polite, fulsome way? And how could I put this? Well, we respect the title of Prime Minister, so we will do this respectfully. We owe him that respect. He's the Prime Minister. I respect him. So I don't know what the Liberals are afraid of or what he's afraid of. Now, if you want an intelligent analysis, and I think Mr. Turnbull has also referred to this. Mr. Turnbull has undertaken extensive studies, as has Ms. Duncan. And so why would we restrict ourselves to two points without necessarily being able to decide whether there's an actual connection? Listen, you're academics. What I'm telling you is, let's go.
Yes, Mr. Lukitsky?
Yeah, sorry about that. I apologize, Monsieur Terrea, but the audio levels are identical. In other words, I cannot hear either Mr. Terrian or the interpreter because they're canceling one another out. If Mr. Terrian, if I'm listening in English, I would prefer, obviously, if the French is muted somewhat so I can hear clearly the English interpretation, but that's not happening. So if you could talk perhaps with the IT specialist, I don't know if it's only my computer or others, but it's very, very distracting since both audio levels are the same.
Do you have your mute original audio selected?
Yeah, no, everything is working as it should. It's just for some reason, when Monsieur Therrien is speaking, his audio levels are fine, but the interpretation is at the same level and they're blocking one another out. It's very difficult to understand what's being said.
Okay. It wasn't happening the whole time, right? It just started happening at the end just now?
The last few minutes.
Okay. And is everyone else experiencing the same thing? Whoever has it on interpretation? Okay, Ms. Duncan, you are?
Madam Chair, so it appears that Dr. Duncan and Mr. Lukiski are having a similar issue, if I understand correctly. And are there any other members also having that problem?
Okay. I wasn't really, yeah.
Madam Chair, I really, like Mr. Lukiski, really had to struggle. And I'm paying attention to what Monsieur Therrien is saying, but it's difficult. Thank you.
Just 1 second, everyone. I'll be right back.
Okay, let's just suspend for 2 minutes.
I haven't said much over the past several weeks. And I see that, unfortunately, when I do speak, not everyone can hear me. But perhaps people could point that out right away when I'm speaking, and then I'll stop sooner. Because it's unfortunate that some weren't able to hear me and some could. So please don't hesitate to interrupt me if ever there are problems. I'm not going to get angry at anyone. It takes more than that to upset me. So I'm just going to come back to what I was saying. I don't know if I should be repeating some of what I said. I don't necessarily want to be repetitive. However, when you look at the motion, the amendment, and the sub-amendment, what I would say is this. Number one, we're asking, according to the motion, for the Prime Minister to appear. And this is all in the motion and the amendment. And we've been saying for months that we want him to appear, and we're holding to that. Now, the Liberals accepted to a certain extent that Ms. Vecchio's motion would be shortened, cleaned up somewhat. And this was all done in a spirit of collaboration. Now, when I speak about collaboration, well, it happened on all sides. Ms. Vecchio accepted Mr. Blakey's motion. I did, and even the Liberals did to a certain degree. They agreed that Mr. Trudeau should come before the committee. But then an amendment was brought forward from Mr. Lauzon, who said, well, in the end, we're going to invite him. And if he can't come, well, we're just going to add it to an annex to the main report. And then that's where everything no longer makes sense. It doesn't make any sense to proceed in this way because what it means is that we've actually wasted 2 or 3 months. I don't know how many exactly. Because what we saw as something that we had to do in order to do our work well is that it won't happen. He's going to be invited, and he has the option to turn down the invitation. Now, here's what I have to say about this. With this kind of amendment, I could tell you Mr. Trudeau won't come. I'm not in the habit of making predictions, but this is a prediction. He won't come. So, for goodness sake, it's obvious that the Liberals don't want him to come before the committee. And all those who want Mr. Trudeau to come to the committee should be saying, Well, he is going to come to committee, but what did Mr. Blakey said? He said, it doesn't matter if it comes before the committee. What's important is that we have a deadline of June 8th. He's saying that that's what's important, regardless of whether or not Mr. Trudeau comes before the committee. And on top of that, what was being said was that they wanted Mr. Trudeau to come, and in the end they're saying it doesn't matter if he comes or not. And on top of that, they're saying we have to wrap up our work by June 8th. We have a motion, an amendment, a sub-amendment, and you know what? That's not going to be the last of it. So what's happening is that we're being gagged. Now, I can't speak for the other parties, but obviously in the Bloc, we are absolutely against this. Because of what I said before, I don't want to be repetitive. And even though Mr. Turnbull's already talked about repetition being a tool, he was saying that, you know, when you're teaching, you repeat so that people can better understand. And oftentimes, when you're a teacher, yes, you have to do that. He's right. But I'm not going to do that here. I mean, we've already talked about this a lot. Simply, I just want to say that number 2 didn't shed enough light. And so we need to see number 1 here. And I should take a look at this, but I think at some point Mr. Rodriguez said, listen, I'm not the one who decides on prorogation. It's the Prime Minister who does that. So he said it himself. So if we want to be able to study prorogation, even Mr. Rodriguez said, well, it's the Prime Minister who made the decision. And so we need to invite him. It's clear. We need to invite Mr. Trudeau. And that's why this was such a big step forwards with the other motion. If you look at Ms. Vecchio's motion, it was pretty long and heavy. But everyone accepted to streamline this. We didn't want partisanship. Everyone agreed, we'll just have Mr. Trudeau before the committee and we'll ask him questions, with all due respect to his position. And so we'll have him here for 1 hour. And the Liberals will also have questioning time in that hour. So it's not going to be a bad 15 minutes. You know, we're not going to do a sort of Joan of Arc inquisition or anything. That's all we want to do is ask him questions about prorogation. So that's where I stand. I'm truly disappointed. I know I haven't spoken much, but I have the feeling that I'm exaggerating the point. However, when I look at what has happened over the past several weeks, well, I have 8 years of experience in politics. I don't have the same amount of experience as you necessarily. I may be older, but I'm really a bit of a baby when it comes to politics. However, in politics, in my brief life in politics, I've hardly ever seen what I've seen in the past several weeks. I even spoke to my wife about this. I've told her, this makes no sense. I needed to speak to someone because I can't believe it. And my wife was so discouraged. She said, this makes no sense. Alain, this makes no sense. So even my wife, I'm telling you, thinks that this doesn't make sense. And I would say to Mr. Blakey, well, really, I take my hat off to your complete turn about in your position. I'll give you 3 stars. You're really the Carey Price of amendments. I'm truly, truly impressed. Now, perhaps I'll speak later. For now, I'm going to wrap up. That just about says everything. And I'm saying this with all friendship, in friendship to all of you, because I have a lot of respect for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thériault. I definitely had some of those emotions in my first term in PROC. That there were things that surprised me, but not too much surprises me anymore, I guess. But I haven't been in politics that long either, so similar amount of years, almost a little bit less than you, actually. So you have plenty of experience. Ms. Vecchio.
Thanks very much. And I won't be speaking too long, but I just kind of wanted to comment because I do really appreciate where Alain was coming from. I understand where he's coming from because, yes, we are pushing on the Prime Minister to be here. I also have great respect for Daniel, though, because I do know that Daniel, what he wants to see is he wants to ensure that this report gets to the table. My problem is both of these things could have happened if we didn't filibuster for 3 months and 3 days. So we're seeing ourselves in these last few weeks having to crush down on where we need to go. And it's all due to the fact that for 3 months and 3 days, there was a filibuster. Now, I'll be honest, you saw every single person vote to gut this motion. And so I cannot support Mr. Lauzon's motion. Thanks very much, Stefan. I can't support that because to me, it's just so weak. It's here you go. I'm going to invite you, but you don't have to show up. There is no way this Prime Minister is going to show up for 3 months and 3 days. And this has been going on for some time. I've heard many of my colleagues on the government side indicate, well, about the We Charity and that this has gone away and all of these types of things. You can say that it's gone away because I'll be honest, you're representing, I look at, oh gosh, I can look at my mail. Was there a lot of people asking about we? No, I'll be honest, not a lot of people asking about we. But there were people asking about prorogation. There were people asking about the obstruction of this government. There were people asking about transparency and accountability. And so when I talk about what I want to bring to my constituents, it's the fact that once again, this government's not being transparent and accountable. Exactly what this government was elected on in 2015. Perhaps the 2019 said no longer accountable and transparent. Maybe that was the new slogan that I missed. But those are the issues that I have here is I understand where every party's coming from. I'm looking at the Liberals. Yes, protecting the king seems to be what everybody has to do. We've seen it in every committee, whether it's ethics or defense or whatever it may be. We cannot let Trudeau get up there. And maybe it's because we don't know what he might say because he slips all the time, or maybe it's because he just can't come and have to speak to the members of the PROC committee who are all members of parliament, just like he is the Prime Minister. And do you know what I call to that? That's just, I'm sorry, we're in a democracy. We're supposed to be able to talk here. We should be accountable. And it does not matter who that Prime Minister is, whether it's Trudeau today or O'Toole tomorrow or whoever. There should be accountability from our leaders. And that is something we have not seen at all. So I look at the members of the government saying, you wasted time for 3 months and 3 days. You're now saying we've got an amendment on here that gives him a RSVP, which was I think it was put on Thursday of last week, meaning even that invitation to go out. We're talking about very few days. I want to now just switch to the fact that even with, and this is where I want to talk a little bit more about where Daniel's amendment is. Daniel has put something out there because he really does believe that there needs to be a report tabled. I share in the feeling that there should be a report tabled. Well, we worked for 3.5 months on this. There should be a report. But I'm looking at these committee members saying, I believe that there would be a report tabled. And that is why I can't support these motions from either.
Vecchio?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Can you adjust your boom mic just a little bit?
Can. A little down. Is that better?
I think maybe a little up would be better because it pops.
More my nose?
Yes, around your nose. Yeah.
There's pointing to my nose. So just speaking about those things, I think some of the things that I'm really concerned with is we have seen reports that were supposed to be tabled already this week by committees. Ethics report, not tabled. Defense report, not tabled. These were timelines that were negotiated just like we see today. And I guess it's because I really feel like it's not the members here that are in charge of this committee. It is the whips that I know that are all on watching to see what we do. And it's basically people being told, listen, we're not going to have the Prime Minister continue to filibuster. I know that the members of this committee do not have a choice whether the Prime Minister comes or not, because he is in his little circle of he does not have to come. I just wish that we had the accountability. And that's where I sit there and say, I don't know why everybody will just fold on not having the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is absolutely the person who has to come here. And as I said, I understand Daniel wants to get this report out there. There has been some good information that's come from this report, but without the Prime Minister speaking, this report is just a paperclip at the back saying, and the Prime Minister decided not to come. And that's really what it is. For 3 months, we heard about how we could invite everybody. No, although not one of those persons that we spoke about even made the consideration of coming to this committee. Those are concerns that I continue to have. So I will let my time go now, but I think part of my issue is I understand where Mr. Tarian is on this. I totally understand. For 3.5 months, we've listened to issues on relevance and repetition and all this kind of stuff. And now, as he indicates, the clock is ticking. We know that there's only a few weeks left. This minority parliament has not been successful at getting legislation through. It's been very much a joke if you're looking at even the work that's been done in previous minority governments, or the fact this length of time. I recognize that we're in COVID. We all know that. But I just sit here and say, listen, once again, even with C-19, we bring it to committee, and then the Senate's going to sit through all summer. Is that what's going to happen? And it all comes down to the fact that 3.5 months were wasted on this filibuster. And at the end of the day, as Mr. Tarian has said, it's one of those things that he feels like there's a knife to his throat. I get it. I understand that. And I understand why Daniel is doing this as well. But I really hold it on to this, members, and I would like to ask the members of this Liberal Committee whether or not the PMO will allow you to report on this, because this report is going to be damning on the fact that the Prime Minister had no intention of coming to committee, even though he was asked several times. No members of the government were willing to come to this committee, with the exception of Pablo Rodriguez, because, being the House Leader, great speaker. I have great admiration for Pablo, because I've never seen somebody so smooth, and I think I've told him that as well. But at the end of the day, it's not a decision of this committee. It's the decision of the PMO. And I just sit there and I think, wow, the PMO sure is powerful, isn't he? And that's very concerning. There's 338 members of parliament, and we have one guy who just won't come to committee because he doesn't have to be held to account. So I will leave my time now, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Vecchio. Mr. Tarian. Mr. Tarian?
Oui.
Yes, just a few minutes, because Mrs. Vecchio was speaking before, and I got back to her initial motion that was tabled. I'd like to get back quickly on this motion that was tabled, which is quite lengthy. You have item or paragraph A, B, C, etc. In A, we were asking for the presence of Mr. Trudeau for 3 hours. So we settled for at least 1 hour. So it's a big compromise because, and why? Because as I said before, we have to have the Prime Minister to do a rational job, something intelligent, worthy of our committee and our mission. B, renew the invitations issued to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth. We said that we would not invite them after all. We will give up on this because we don't want to do any partisanship. C, renew the invitations issued to the Honourable Bill Morneau, Cathy Telford, Craig Kilberger, and Mark Kilberger. We dropped that. We said it's not so bad, because if the Prime Minister comes, we will know the reasons why we had to prorogue. There won't be any partisanship. Then, renew the invitations issued to the Honourable Bill Morneau, Cathy Telford, or renew the invitations issued to Farah Perlmutter. We dropped that as well because this was not the goal. We have a mandate. We want to understand why there was prorogation, and we will focus on this. We won't do any partisanship. We don't want to do that. E, issue an order for the production of all memoranda, emails, text messages, documents, notes, or other records from the Prime Minister's office. We dropped that. We said we don't want to do that. We don't want to do politics with the work that we have to do, especially because PROC is considered as a committee where you have people working in order to find the truth so that we can improve the efficiency of our institutions. And when you're talking about institutions and prorogations, it goes without saying. You have to understand why we go for prorogation, and we we have to analyze the structures and the dynamism characterizing those institutions. Then issue an order for the production of records of all communications between the government and any of we charity, etc. We drop that again. This is another step forward. Those are not only steps, it's almost a run forward. Then G, issue orders to we charity, we drop that as well. This is what we've done. So we've made big step forwards to show our good faith. And if the Liberals trust their Prime Minister, and I know that they trust him because he is their leader, just like I trust my leader and his capacity to intervene and answer questions. So if the Liberals trust their leader, their Prime Minister, why don't they let them come to PROC for 1 hour? If you look at the committee, Mr. Lekiski, I won't name them all, but Mrs. Vecchio, myself, Mr. Blakey, we're not Draculas or Frankensteins.
On peut juste poser des questions pour avoir un éclairage intelligent. Puis il y a juste le premier ministre qui peut nous permettre d'avoir ça. C'est tout ce qu'on veut.
Madam Chair, I have not had any
Interpretation? Can you hear the interpretation? Interpretation?
For about 10 seconds or so. Wondering if somehow, Monsieur Terrien, either you can repeat the last sentence that you said. I think it was the last sentence.
Ouais, je parlais de Frankenstein.
I was just talking about Frankenstein, says Mr. Terrien.
Les libéraux, bon là c'est moi qui entends la. Ouais.
We don't.
I was sending a friendship message to my friends, the Liberals.
It's not completely clear yet from our end what the problem
interpretation is there again. It's just the delay seems to be very long, longer than usual. There's always a delay, of course, that makes sense, but it's a very lengthy delay.
Okay, well, we'll try to continue for now, and we'll see if it sort of corrects itself.
Mm-hmm.
Est-ce que je peux parler?
Can I go on? Yes, yes. So I thought it was because Frankenstein is anti-parliamentary, rather. So I will summarize very simply. I ask my Liberal colleagues, I don't know if you've heard that when I was saying that they have to be proud of their leader because he's the Prime Minister, and I'm convinced that they trust him, and if he comes here, he will be able to manage. And if my leader had to come before a committee, I would be very confident that Mr. Blanchet would do a good job. And I will conclude with this. When we look at the people in this committee, I don't believe that we're people who will do things that won't be correct. We are only looking for the truth, and we'll be asking questions, and I'm convinced that the Liberals as well will find satisfaction in this presence because, and I'm sure that they're asking themselves questions. When I hear Mrs. Duncan and Mr. Turnbull, among others, I'm convinced that those people want to hear the real story about prorogation. And maybe one day we'll be able to tell our children and grandchildren that we were able to understand exactly why in 2020 the government decided to prorogue Parliament. I think that we have a challenge before us and we have a responsibility towards our people. I will stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Terrien. So we have no more speakers on the speakers list. Mr. Clerk, I'm assuming that by that, everyone is ready to move on to deciding on the sub-amendment. put forward by Mr. Blakey. Would you like a recorded vote on that? Okay. Could we get a recorded vote, Miss?
Madam Chair, the question is on Mr. Blakey's sub-amendment. Dr. Duncan.
Yes.
Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Oui.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Oui.
Mr. Morrissey.
Yes.
Ms. Vecchio.
Members answer yes, but I didn't hear the question.
Oh.
And that's the only audio I'm getting is a one-word response.
Okay, the question is on Mr. Blakey's sub-amendment. Would you like us to read out the sub-amendment?
I'm fine. I know what the sub-amendment is. I'm just saying that I'm not getting any audio other than a response of one word from, in this case, the Liberals. So I won't even know when you asked or called my name.
Oh, you're not hearing the calling of the names.
No, I'm not.
So you're not hearing the feed from the clerk then?
No, I'm not.
Go ahead, Mr. Clerk. Can you say something just so we can test it?
Yes, hello, just testing. We're testing from the room. Mr. Lekiski, can you hear us?
Not hearing a thing, Madam Chair.
No, he's not hearing anything, he says.
Okay, apologies, Madam Chair. We'll have to probably suspend and sort of try to figure out what the issue is.
Can you hear me, Mr. Lekiski?
I can hear you, but I cannot
Okay.
hear the clerk.
Can't hear the clerk.
Are other members having difficulty hearing me now as I speak?
No, we can all hear.
No.
I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, just stand by. We'll try to see if it's an issue that's emanating from
Clerk is
this end.
speaking now. I'm not hearing anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
1 second.
Someone will be calling you, Mr. Lekiski.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we're going to have an IT ambassador call Mr. Lekiski. So I don't know if you want to suspend while we're doing that, seeing as Mr. Lekiski is not able to hear anything we're saying or hear what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yep. We'll suspend for 2 minutes.
I'm picking up with the vote now. Ms. Vecchio.
No.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Mr. Lakiski.
No.
Mr. Kent.
No.
Monsieur Terrien.
No.
Mr. Blakey.
Yes.
Madam Chair, 6 yeas, 5 nays. Sub-amendment is carried.
Okay. Mr. Nader, you have your hand up.
Yes, Madam Chair, I assume we're back on the debate on the amendment as amended.
We are on Mr. Luzon's amendment as amended by Mr. Blakey's sub-amendment. Yes.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. And I will be brief. I don't believe in stretching out discussion any more than it needs to be to get a few points on the floor. I just want to say
you must have changed your beliefs, Mr. Nader.
Well, it all depends on whether I'm speaking on a matter of grave importance that needs me to flesh out many clear details. But I mean, it reminds me of something, going back to filibusters of days gone by. Usually there's a purpose and often a noble purpose in doing so in a filibuster. In the previous parliament, we did so with the support of our colleagues in the NDP to prevent unilateral changes to the House of Commons standing orders. We felt very strongly that was the purpose of that. In this case,
you're allowed to change your mind.
in this case, however, it appears that our friends in the Liberal Party are filibustering to protect one person and one person only, being the Right Honourable the Prime Minister. But I do digress. Very briefly, what we see now is we have an amendment as amended that basically guts, the first amendment from Mr. Blakey gutted the entire motion to 1 hour of the Prime Minister's time. And now we see that the Liberals can't even see themselves supporting 1 single hour, 60 minutes of the Prime Minister's time. I recognize the Prime Minister is a very busy person. He is the Prime Minister of our country, but 60 hours within a 24-hour day is not a commitment. Responsibilities that are out there, and I would say that in the mandate letter of each Minister of the Crown, it was stated that they would make themselves available to parliamentary committees when required and when needed. And this is certainly one of the important parliamentary committees, and the Prime Minister has been seen as the only decision maker on this matter. We've heard that from experts. We've heard that from witnesses coming before the committee. The government House leader was not the decision maker. The government House leader was not involved in the discussions prior to, from his testimony, a matter of hours and no more than days before the decision was taking place. It is the Prime Minister who made the decision, and we've heard that throughout the process. We all know what's going to happen with this motion if it passes as it has been amended. The Prime Minister will not show up, and we will have, as Ms. Vecchio said, a paper clip at the end of the report stating that he didn't come. It's pretty lame, for lack of a better word, when we spend all this time, first of all, on this filibuster, before that, hearing from witnesses on this matter to get to this point that we're really not going to see much of that going forward. So what I would do is I would make the suggestion that we amend this amendment slightly. So I'm introducing a sub-amendment, and I will email this out to Justin, send it to the committee so that the committee has it in both of our country's official languages. But very simply, that the amendment be amended by replacing the words, quote, "the non-attendance of the Prime Minister be added to an annex to," end quote, with the following: a recommendation this committee be empowered to order the Prime Minister's attendance be included in. So I'll send that so that committee members have the context of what this is saying. But basically, what we're suggesting with this sub-amendment is that there be a recommendation in the report that the committee be given the authority to call the Prime Minister to have his appearance before the committee, and that would be part of the report when it's finalized. So I'm not going to say anything more than this. I think the committee knows where I stand on this, knows where we stand on this, and as soon as I see the floor, I will push send on that email so that it goes to Justin, our clerk, and he'll be able to distribute that sub-amendment to the committee. And I will end my comments there, Madam Chair, and cede the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nader. And I was obviously just kidding and joking around with you. I feel I can do that with some of the members I've known a little bit longer. But thank you for that amendment, or I guess sub-amendment. And we'll be just waiting for you to get that in writing. I think all the members, seeing how everyone's been operating in the last few meetings, will probably want to take a look at that. So basically, you're adding a a recommendation that you have preconceived into what you want to see in the report at this point. Okay. All right, Mr. Turnbull.
Well, I just wanted to say I appreciate the levity that you bring to our meetings, Madam Chair, and your sense of humor is appreciated by myself and I'm sure many other colleagues. I would just ask with Mr. Nader's proposed sub-amendment or amendment, I'm not sure which at this point, I think it's a sub-amendment, would we be able to take a short suspension when we get it, just to have a quick read, please? Madam Chair, you're on mute.
Would the committee be okay with a 10-minute suspension to take a look at it? Mr. Nader, have you already emailed it?
Yeah, so it's been sent to the clerk, and
Okay.
hopefully that will be working its way through the interwebs as we speak and getting to him shortly.
That's what I just received it now. I'll be sending it out to the members' P9s momentarily.
Okay, it's 12:10 right now. We'll suspend for 10 minutes, and I'll see you back at 12:20. And we have just been presented with a sub-amendment by Mr. Nader, and everyone has received that sub-amendment. Hopefully there were no problems. No one was left off the list. Everyone has received it? Okay, everyone's had a chance to take a look then at it, since you were given time to do that over the suspension. And so I think the natural thing to do at this point would be to vote on the sub-amendment then. Mr. Clerk, could you help us with, Mr. Blakey, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Without wanting to take up too much time, I do want to say that I think, for me anyway, the important objective of today's meeting is get to a point where we know that the committee is resolved to issue a report next Tuesday so that we can get on to studying Bill C-19. One of the things that I think is different about what Mr. Nader is proposing from what he intends to remove is that in Monsieur Lauzon's amendment, while I share Monsieur Terrien and other opposition MPs' desire very clearly, as I've been stating consistently for months, to see the Prime Minister at committee, I also share their expressed pessimism about the idea that he will appear. They've been very clear they don't think he's going to come. So then the question is, how do you generate some political accountability for that? I believe that's best done with filing a report. If indeed the Prime Minister doesn't come over the next week, Monsieur Lauzon's version makes a descriptive claim about that. So right now we're really just talking about adding a fact to the report, which won't be in dispute at that point. Either the Prime Minister will have come or he won't have come. What Mr. Nader's amendment does is leave the kind of descriptive realm, if you'll excuse a philosopher's definition here, and move into the normative and start making claims about what the report, which we haven't even agreed yet that we're going to get done, is going to say. And I think we need to resolve the question about whether we are in fact committed to getting a report done before we start discussing the recommendations of the report. And so that's why I won't be voting in favor of this amendment, although I'm quite open to a discussion about what the content of the report might be, and the kinds of recommendations that we'll be making in respect of what I think is a failure of leadership on the part of the Prime Minister not to be here. But that's a discussion for what goes in the report once we know we're making one, and we have to get there first. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. Mr. Terrien.
I'd just like to respond to what Mr. Blakey said. There are words and then there are gestures. Words can say things, but gestures are even more convincing. Actions. Now, I read the amendment, and I just need an explanation. What exactly is the scope of this? Because in French, the wording isn't too convincing. Could someone please explain to me clearly what difference this makes? Because I see what we voted on earlier. I understand there's a difference, but I'd like to understand the implications of this one. I'm rather new to procedural matters. So could you just please explain clearly what the implications of this amendment are?
You're on mute,
Madam Chair. You're on mute.
Would you, Mr. Terrien, would you like Mr. Nader to explain the implications? Or I think maybe it's best Mr. Nader explains those implications if he wishes, and then maybe if there's any gaps, me or the clerk can fill those in.
Sure, I would be happy.
Merci.
Yes, please.
Do so, and I do apologize. I will be explaining in English, and hopefully the translation comes through. I don't feel as comfortable in my second official language explaining this. But very simply, the original amendment from Mr. Lauzon basically said that the non-appearance of the Prime Minister would be noted in the report as an annex. What my amendment would do is it would provide a recommendation that the committee be given the power to compel the Prime Minister to appear at the committee. If this report goes to the House of Commons and concurrence is moved, and the House concurs in the report, the committee would therefore have the power to order the appearance, compel the appearance of the Prime Minister before this committee. So it's a little more meaty. There's more teeth to this sub-amendment to compel the Prime Minister's testimony before this committee. I hope that clarifies it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I actually appreciate that you clarified it quite well and explained the implications. So basically, if we get to the report stage of this study, then Monsieur Terrien, at the report stage, we would either look for the government to respond to our report once the report is adopted and then tabled in the House, or we would not look for a response. And in that case, there's an opening to move concurrence in the House on that report, and then the House can vote, Parliament can vote on those recommendations. And could then, as Mr. Nader said, force that recommendation or the Prime Minister to
So then, could the clerk confirm that with Mr. Nader's sub-amendment, we will then have the power to compel Mr. Trudeau to appear before the committee? Could the clerk please confirm that we would have the power to compel the Prime Minister to appear with this amendment? Madam Chair, can I ask the clerk to do that?
Have the power necessarily, but I can give it over to the clerk to clarify.
Oui, Monsieur Lauzon.
Mr. Terrien, rather. This is a proposal. If it's adopted, and if this specific amendment is adopted, there would be a recommendation in the report that would be tabled in the House according to what Mr. Nader has proposed. Now, when it goes back to the House, it's sort of a two-stage thing. When it goes back to the House could decide to entertain a concurrence motion. And if that report is concurred in, then the recommendations contained in the report would become an order from the House. And so that recommendation, as described by Mr. Nader, if it's in the report and the report is then concurred in by the House, then that recommendation does actually become an order from the House. So I hope that makes it clearer. Yes, it's very clear. Thank you very much. Now, I apologize to the others. I prefer to better understand things rather than just pretend to be intelligent. So I agree with Mr. Nader's proposal. So.
Thank you, Monsieur Terrien. Ms. Vecchio and then Mr. Blakey.
Thanks very much. And perhaps we can go into the sim style because I have questions for Nader as well. Sorry, John, I know I usually call him Nader, so I apologize to everybody. Just because for me, I know we have talked about this a little bit. So with this, we'd be putting forward this motion. It goes into the report. At the report part, we move concurrence and have the discussion about the Prime Minister coming once again, in which it should come to a vote then in the House of Commons by parliamentarians to get the Prime Minister here. Is there any likelihood, and I just want this because we've seen what happens here, is there any likelihood that even in the House of Commons, it wouldn't come to a vote like we've seen here? That's just one of my questions for you.
I'm happy to respond, Madam Chair, if that's the will of the committee. I can speak to that very briefly. It would depend on the will of Parliament. So a concurrence motion is scheduled in the House typically for 3 hours, unless an intervening dilatory motion prevents that. A motion to move to orders of the day, a motion to adjourn the debate, a motion to adjourn the House, which would be less unlikely. But after 3 hours of debate on a concurrence motion, it would then be put to the House to vote upon it. So it is a time-limited debate in the House. So there is not an opportunity to put up multiple speakers to filibuster it to no end. Once the debate is completed, it would then be put to the House. Obviously, right now we're under special orders that vote gets deferred until the time's prescribed, so typically the next day after question period, but that would be the process. So would not be an opportunity for the government members to filibuster, or any members for that matter, filibuster a committee report from that end, but there would still be the option for any member to move a dilatory motion to prevent that debate from completing. So hopefully that clarifies it. I'm not, I enjoy parliamentary procedure. I don't say that I'm an expert on all aspects of it. I learned from people who are far smarter than I am over the years, including one of our well-known experts, Mr. John Holtby, who is the co-editor of both Shane's Parliamentary Rules and Forms, one of the wonderful people that provides advice to us from time to time. So I learned from those people and try to put as much of it in the back of my head as possible. So I will leave it like that. Hopefully that clarifies it for you, Karen.
And thanks very much. And that's why I wanted to just talk about this, because obviously we have seen, and I'm just thinking with this sub amendment, hey, that's really positive, because now we can take it to the greater whole, because we have watched this filibuster for 3 months. If we're talking there's only a time frame for 3 hours, that's a very positive thing. And that's why I look at this motion and say, hey, this may give us what we need at the end of the day, which is the Prime Minister. So thanks for bringing this forward. I'll just step back now. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Blakey and then Mr. Therrien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a further question about the process, which I would direct either to you or to the clerk, whoever you think is best suited to provide a response. And maybe just a slight preamble from me, Madam Chair. So, first of all, I think what's important to note about the process is that first the committee has to decide that it's actually going to get on to doing up a report. And unfortunately, we're not there yet. I'd like to get there. I'd like to get there today. We're not there yet. Then we have to determine the content of that report. And there's an attempt here by Mr. Nader to begin that discussion. I think maybe somewhat prematurely, but nevertheless, some good ideas on the table. Then that gets reported back to the House. Then there's the matter of a concurrence debate. Then there's a vote in Parliament, which could turn a recommendation of the report into an order of the House. Then there's the question, and this is my question, Madam Chair, of parliamentary privilege. We know that MPs can't be compelled or don't have to accept invitations to appear. There are certainly lots of examples of that. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister himself is a current example of that. But it seems to me that if you look at in Chapter 20 of the House Procedure and Practice Manual, that it's an open question as to what happens in the event that there is an order issued by the House to a member of Parliament to appear that is not followed. It seems to me that there's some examples cited from 2008, where on a couple of occasions there was this kind of recommendation by a committee in order to try and get the House to order a witness. But in fact, when committees have made that recommendation back to the House, so far, that hasn't been actually dealt with. The House has either chosen not to deal with it, or I believe in the second case referred to in the footnote, Parliament was dissolved before the issue was decided. And so it remains, I think, the further aspect of that, and which is relevant because of the timeline that we're on in terms of the end of June. Again, my frustration is that we're on that timeline really because we have a Prime Minister who seems very likely to call an election in the summer, refuses to say he won't. But what that means is that if we want to be able to report back on some of this, it's got to happen by the end of June. Now, presumably an order of the House, once it were determined, would then provide some time for the Prime Minister to arrange an appearance. It would only be after he didn't appear that you would then have to settle the issue, which would be coming back to the House with some other kind of motion in order to devise some kind of sanction against the Prime Minister for not having appeared. And the question is whether all of that can be done before the end of June, because if it can't, what that means is that not only did the Prime Minister not appear, but PROC never even reported back about it. And I think that would be egregious. So I share the outrage of other members of the committee who are upset that the Prime Minister isn't coming. I do think that shows a lack of leadership. But the question is what you do about it. And I think what you do about it is report back to the House. And as I say, I mean, I'm open to that longer road, but I think we need to get there first. And so I just wonder if the clerk could maybe comment a little bit on how the issue of privilege could interact with an attempt for the House to order the Prime Minister, and what some of those timelines might be if the House wanted to pursue it vigorously.
Yeah, it's very interesting that we're actually discussing the mechanisms of procedure in this way, and I think it's good learning for everyone. Me and the clerk were talking about different privilege matters on Monday and going through different things that could occur. But Daniel, your question is very good. Maybe Justin actually has, the clerk has written extensively about these types of issues and has looked into them before and is an expert for our committee. So I'd, of course, Justin, go ahead and give us a little bit of your wealth of knowledge on this issue.
Madam Chair, thank you. I guess one point I'd make right off the top, my understanding of the sub-amendment that Mr. Nader has put forward is that the report would still get presented to the House. There would be a recommendation along the lines that Mr. Nader is proposing that would be embedded into the report. So there would be a report that does get presented to the House. And then once it does, if it were to be concurred in, the recommendations, including the one that Mr. Nader is putting forward, would become an order of the House. Now, you're right in the sense that committees can, any non-member of Parliament or non-senator or like the Governor General or the Queen, they cannot summon those people to show up at committee, essentially compel them to appear. But there is the mechanism of having the House order a member of Parliament to attend a committee and be available to provide testimony for that committee on any number of reasons or any number of studies a committee is engaged in. Now, of course, the committee can't force that, only the House can. Now, you're right in the sense that if there is non-compliance of a member of Parliament to attend, then the matter that the committee can do is report that fact to the House once again. And it becomes a matter for the House to then deal with and determine an appropriate remedy or response to it. But as you indicated, perhaps in the past, the ability for the House to go to that next level has perhaps not been fully tested, or there may not be several examples of that, or examples that can be that can instruct your work here today. But there's not a problem with an order of the House at this stage requiring the attendance of a member of Parliament to attend a particular committee. If they don't attend, as I said, that's a matter for a future step where the committee could then consider anew what it wants to do about that. Maybe the committee doesn't care about that. Maybe it's not a problem, or maybe some other issue has intervened where it no longer requires that member to attend. However, if the committee is of the view that it is still required, as I said, they can report the fact of the non-appearance by that member, and then it becomes a matter for the House to determine and figure out what they want to do about it, and if the House wants to take any further steps in requiring that member of Parliament's appearance.
Okay, Mr. Therrien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, I'm going to appeal to Mr. Vave for an explanation. When I was given the explanation regarding Mr. Nader's amendment, I read the French version and I'm not convinced. So what I would ask the clerk is this. Is he telling me, or rather, I just want to point out, I'm not trying to blame anyone. I just want to make sure that there's consistency. Sometimes there are so many nuances that subtle changes become very important. So I just want to make sure, that the French version corresponds to exactly what the clerk said earlier on as an explanation. And I'm not trying to blame anyone. I just want to make sure.
Madam Chair, I could respond if you would like.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Monsieur Terrien.
Mr. Terrien, at my reading of the English and the French versions, they are proposing the same thing. That is to say that there be a recommendation in the report that will empower the committee to order the Prime Minister's attendance in this committee. So the committee itself cannot order anything. Only the House can do that. And so in this case, as the chair and Mr. Nader said, if this recommendation is in the report, and if the report is tabled in the House, and ultimately if the House decides to adopt this report through a concurrence motion, then that recommendation becomes an order of the House. And the effect of that will be to create an obligation on the part of the Prime Minister as a member of Parliament to appear before the committee. And so to sum up then, you feel that the translation corresponds to the meaning of Mr. Nader's sub-amendment. That's what you're, and you're telling me that actually it's correct then, the French version. Well, I feel it's correct. Now, obviously, I'm not a linguistic expert. But my reading, and Mr. Nader can correct me if I'm wrong, but my reading of this is that a recommendation be included in the report so that when this report is in the House and if and when it's adopted by the House, that creates that obligation on the part of the Prime Minister to appear before the committee. And it allows the committee to compel him to appear by the authority of the House. Thank you very much, Mr. Vave. I appreciate that.
Madam Chair, sorry.
Thank you, sorry, Mr. Nader. Did you want
to? Sorry,
no, is it okay if Mr. Nader interjects?
Certainly.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, thank our clerk, and his explanation is consistent with the meaning of my motion. To Monsieur Terrien, I thank him for his interventions on this because I do take our both official languages very seriously, and so I do want to make sure that when we do have these translations, and we did have this translated by the Translation Bureau, because I do want to make sure that it is consistent. I was the vice chair of the Official Languages Committee in the previous Parliament for nearly 2 years, so I do have a special understanding and appreciation for our two official languages. So I did just want to clarify that, and if there were any translation errors, and we all make mistakes, I would fully take the blame for that, but I do appreciate the clerk's explanation, and that is consistent with the sub-amendment that I moved. So I will leave that there. I don't think there's anything more to say, but appreciate the interventions on that. Thank you.
Mr. Lukowski?
Thank you, Chair. And I will be very brief. I just want everyone to know what the consequences will be as a result of a vote on Mr. Nader's sub-amendment, should we get to a vote today. If the vote is defeated, the reality is that means the Prime Minister will never appear before our committee. Now, I'm reading the political tea leaves a little bit here in anticipating that Mr. Blakey will be voting against Mr. Nader's sub-amendment. But that would have the effect, as I've just said, that the Prime Minister will never appear. He may be asked to appear, but he will not be compelled to appear. Only Mr. Nader's motion would have a possibility of compelling the Prime Minister to appear. So everyone should be very, very aware of that. A vote against Mr. Nader's sub-amendment means we will never see the Prime Minister at this committee to answer any questions about prorogation and his reasons for bringing forward prorogation when he did. And that, in my view, would be extremely unfortunate. And I'm choosing my words carefully. I would have other words to use rather than unfortunate. But being observant of parliamentary decorum, I will leave it at that. But colleagues, make no mistake. What the Liberals have been doing for the last 3 months during their filibuster is to prevent the Prime Minister from appearing at this committee. If this committee votes against Mr. Nader's motion and in favor of Mr. Blakey's sub-amendment, which we've already voted upon and passed, the reality is the Prime Minister will never appear. We will never hear from him. And that is more than just unfortunate. Frankly, I think it's shameful. But that's the reality, colleagues. I'll cede my time to the next speaker. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lukiski. Mr. Kent.
Well, thank you, Chair. And as we move towards the inevitable in this very long and unnecessarily prolonged discussion, I'd just like to reflect on what's been going on for the last 3 months plus. We have dealt with one another in this committee very respectfully, very collegially, with a certain amount of humor, but at the same time recognizing that the Liberal minority on this committee was acting to protect the Prime Minister, to prevent the will of the majority of the members on this committee, and basically fulfilling an objective that was described very eloquently in the Globe and Mail with regards to the behavior of Liberal minority membership on committees right across the House to essentially prevent accountability on any number of crucially important matters that should be considered, that should be examined, that should be open to consideration to every standing committee and special committee, for that matter,
Mr.
of the House
Kent?
of Commons. Yes.
Okay. Could you adjust your boom mic up a little bit? There's that popping noise again.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I apologize. I must say that Mr. Blakey's passionate interventions throughout the 3-month filibuster until today, until this week, until the end of proceedings last week when there was a sudden apparent backroom liaison between the NDP and the Liberals, and Mr. Lauzon suddenly came up with a confected on-the-fly motion, which is still under consideration here today. But I think Mr. Blakey laid out very well from his point of view, as Mr. Therrien did, as Ms. Vecchio and Mr. Nader and Mr. Lukiski, the opposition's desire to call the only individual who can fully explain the decision to prorogue Parliament last August. And I regret the fact that by running out the clock, unfortunately successfully, with this filibuster, the committee has been placed in a position where the backs are against the wall and where priorities are bringing us to the point where the united opposition has been effectively defeated by the Liberal filibuster in running out the clock. And I agree that with Mr. Blakey that it's highly unlikely that whatever motion might have been passed by this committee, calling on the Prime Minister, inviting the Prime Minister to speak for 3 hours, for 1 hour, to just show up, was highly unlikely. But I think that it is the responsibility of committees to, as we often hear from the Liberal House Leader, to stand with a mind of its own, accountable to the constituents that elected each of us individually, and to the appointments by our respective parties to deliver accountable, responsible performance in the activities of the various committees. And in this committee, the mother of committees, the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, it is exceptionally disappointing. This is one of the most disappointing moments I've had in 13 years in elected office in the House of Commons, where the will of the majority members has been defied by a minority for the most venal of reasons. So I'll leave it there. I know that we won't get to a vote today. The time for a complete and thoughtful report of this committee, I think that clock has already run out. I suspect that Mr. Blakey, in making a report essential to his position to vote with the Liberals, has more to do with the supplementary or the dissenting report that he and the Conservatives and the Bloc will be enabled to attach to the report, which has been, I'm sure, competently assembled by our analysts. But I think that is that's a false victory. It's an imperfect victory, and I think that we should all hang our heads in shame at the way this committee has been dysfunctional over the last three months plus. Thank you.
I'm surprised that you think you might have to write a dissenting report. I feel you'll have a lot of support on many of those recommendations that you might wish to move, but I guess only if we get to that point will we know that. I don't know. I'd be surprised. I think the Conservatives would be happy that they'll probably get a lot of recommendations in the report that they want to see. But Ms. Vecchio, you're next.
Yeah, and thank you very much. And just carrying on with Peter's words, I do fully respect the fact that we have seen in the past, I'm looking at some of the types, Minister Qualtrough has come, and she has come to committee and has been put in as one of these things to come to committee. We've also seen these in other committees with the China-Canada committee where they're asking for people to come. There's lots of things that we should be doing here, and I really do respect where John has gone on this, because I think at the end of the day, there's only one person who needs to speak on this report. It's very unfortunate that his voice will not actually be in this report because he chooses not to come, or perhaps maybe I can ask, has there been, and to the clerk, has there actually been an invitation to the Prime Minister sent, and has there ever been a response? If you just the time frame on that, has there ever been, since this all started, anything sent to him? Has there ever been a response? What can we look at there?
Madam Chair, I can answer. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. It's the same answer, though. It's was sent at the very beginning when the request was made.
Could I actually get some? If I could actually get dates and know when he was asked and when he actually did reply, what follow-up was done as well. I would really like to know that, because I know for months I listened to how Chrystia Freeland had come, yet no one rapped on her door to say, yo, Chrystia, can you please come to our committee? And so I really want to know what's actually happening. I just really want to know the actual facts and how much true intention was given to having any of the Liberal ministers actually come.
Madam Chair, I can answer Ms. Vecchio. The original invitation to the Prime Minister, as well as to the other witnesses that had been identified as the committee wanting to hear from, go back to a steering committee report and I don't have the exact precise dates in the top of my head, but back in February, where the steering committee had recommended a whole series of witnesses be invited. That included the Prime Minister, it included Ministers Chager, Ministers Freeland, the Kielburger brothers, Mr. and Mrs. Perlmutter, as well as Bill Morneau. That steering committee had, the recommendations for those witnesses had been ratified by the main committee also back in February. Invitations were sent out to all of those people. When it comes to ministers of the Crown, such as Ministers Chager, Minister Freeland, and the Prime Minister, we go through departmental contacts, parliamentary relations people who work with the Minister's office, or in the case of the Prime Minister, with the Prime Minister's office through PCO to coordinate a response. Now, in the case of the Prime Minister and Ministers Chager and Freeland, the invitation was made. I still, as of today, do not have a formal response, yes or no, to that invitation. I did remind them, even as your motion was moved back at the end of February, that despite the fact that you had a new motion that you were proposing to re-invite these people, that the original invitation was still a live invitation, and that at any point they can get back to me with a formal response indicating yes or no. Periodically through the intervening 3+ months, I have checked in with each of those departments and the Privy Council office to see where they were at in responding to the invitation. But as I indicated, I have not, as of yet, received a formal response to any of those 3 invitations. Some of the witnesses that the committee had called for that weren't cabinet ministers or ministers of the Crown, some of those witnesses did in fact get back to me definitively. Mr. Morneau got back to me definitively and declined. Mr. and Mrs. Perlmutter also got back to me definitively and declined, as I indicated to the committee some time ago. And as for Mark and Craig Kielburger, I went back and forth with their representative as to a date, but they never settled on a date. So we never sort of formally heard back in a formalized way for those 2 witnesses.
We could always add that in the report. If we move on to the report, then we could give you all of the analysts. You know, it's up to you guys. If you want all of that, that could be always added into the report.
Well, I was just checking to see. I mean, honestly, we filibustered for 3.5 months, saying we're going to invite people who already had invitations. So I guess the thing is, as we're looking at this motion today, which John has put forward, I know that once again, the Prime Minister will not be coming. And so therefore, I think it is imperative that the House of Commons, where the majority are not in government, where the majority would like to actually hear from the Prime Minister, regardless of how things end up in this committee. I know that every opposition member wants to hear from the Prime Minister, regardless of this vote. This is what we're trying to do today, is trying to force the Prime Minister to come, to be accountable. And I will end there saying accountability is what should be leading this country and is not. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Clerk, can you help us with the vote on the sub-amendment?
It's 12:59. Will we have time?
Yeah, I think so. Go ahead, Mr. Clerk.
Madam Chair, the question is on Mr. Nader's sub-amendment. Dr. Duncan.
No.
Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
No.
Mr. Turnbull.
No.
Monsieur Lauzon.
No.
Mr. Morrissey.
No.
Ms. Vecchio.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Lakisky.
Yes.
Mr. Kent.
Yes.
Monsieur Terrien.
Oui.
Mr. Blakey.
No.
Madam Chair, Mr. Nader's sub-amendment is defeated 5-6.
Okay, would it be possible to move to the next, Mr. Lauzon's amended motion as well right now? There's a few hands up. Mr. Nader?
No.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and not to prolong this, but I do have a second amendment, and this is a sub-amendment, I should clarify, very simple, and this will require that the committee table this report and table it before we move forward with any other business of this committee. We have seen, and Mr. Kent mentioned about his reading of the Globe and Mail about what is happening in other making it through to the House of Commons. So this would be a fairly simple sub-amendment, and I will read it out, but as before, I do have it in both official languages, and I will email it directly to the clerk once I've finished having the floor. But I will read it out at this point. That the amendment be amended by replacing all the words after the words, quote, disposed of, end quote, with the following before the committee begins consideration of Bill C-19, end quote. So again, very simply, if we're going to go directly to drafting this report and tabling it in the House of Commons, we need to do this before we move on to the next business of this committee. I do not want to see the past number of months wasted by having a filibuster on a committee report when we do the line by line review. We've seen that happen in other committees where there's report out of very important and very serious matters that are before those committees. So that's my amendment. I will cede the. Thank you, Karen. I will cede the floor at this point, and just give me the 30 seconds or so that will be necessary for me to then click send on the both English and French versions of that subcommittee. So I will see.
So your amendment basically just says that, I mean, Mr. Blakey's amendment or sub-amendment that already passed already requires there to be a tabling of the report on June 11th. And you're just saying that, okay, that's fine. The tabling will happen on June 11th, but we can't start anything before in that time.
That's correct, Madam Chair. The purpose of this sub-amendment is that the business of the committee will proceed with this committee report prior to taking up any other business, namely Bill C-19. So I will cede the floor and send out that email immediately so that everyone has it, and we will go from there.
Okay, Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to take the floor just to express some real disappointment with the way that today's meeting has gone, because I had really hoped that we would get to the point where we could get on with issuing a report. The timeline was tight as it is. My Conservative colleagues know that. They've spent a lot of time talking today after spending months saying they were tired of hearing talking and that we should vote on issues before the committee so that decisions can be rendered. And they've found ways to extend this debate without us getting to actually making these decisions. I appreciate the tightness of the timeline. I know that. I'm not happy about it. I get that Liberal members of the committee got us here by filibustering for some time. And I appreciate the frustration. The question is whether at some point you want to decide to get anything done or not. So after listening for months to one party that has a prime minister in office or allegations of political abuse of prorogation, we finally get to the point where there might be a decision taken on how to proceed as a committee. Let the committee speak. That's what we've been hearing from Conservatives rightly for months now. And now I'm watching the other party that has had prime ministers who have been accused of political abuses of prorogation take up the filibuster where the Liberals left off, because we got two parties that aren't interested in building in meaningful accountability on how the prime minister uses the powers of prorogation and dissolution. And that's what's going on. And I'm sorry I forgot Monsieur Terrien. It's just hard to know where the block is at on any given day. I mean, here we had, before C-19 was sent to committee, the NEP reached out to other parties to say that we wanted to
Madam Chair, I would like to intervene.
With other parties to find a way to move.
Madam Chair, point of order. Can I make a point of order? We were supposed to wrap up at 1 o'clock. Can we end the meeting? We'll receive Mr. Nader's sub-amendment and then come back on Thursday. Perhaps that would avoid some of the sermons coming from Mr. Blakey. I'm sorry, I thought you enjoyed my sermons. I'm disappointed. No, not at all, says Mr. Terrien.
Just let Mr. Blakey end and then we'll suspend.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, when the NDP reached out to other parties to say we want to find a way to get C19 to committee without time allocation, it was a non-starter from the bloc. Then we got C19 to committee, and then it was the bloc leaders sent a letter saying they wanted to talk about how to move C19 forward. We've had many reversals of position by the bloc. It just seems to depend on the day, Madam Speaker. So forgive me if I can't quite decipher the logic of their position. But I think it's pretty clear when it comes to the Conservatives. Here we are. We have the opportunity to move forward with a report, to make some concrete recommendations about how to improve a standing order in order to prevent future abuses of prorogation. And the Conservatives have picked up the filibuster where the Liberals left off. So, I mean, I put it to Canadians, send me your suggestions on how to break this impasse. I would like to put rules in place so that if we have an election during this summer, which the Prime Minister has made it all but clear is his intention, unless things are so cataclysmically bad that he can't pull it off, I'd like to get some rules in place so that we can have a proper election. What we've seen here are more delay tactics and efforts not only to push this report back into the summer where it will cease to exist, but also C19. So come on, guys, like at a certain point, we got to make some decisions here. Mm-hmm. And we do have timelines. I don't like them either, but I'm not the one responsible for the situation we're in either. So I hope at the next meeting, people are going to come actually ready to get on with it. And we're probably going to have to look at now changing the timelines in the motion, which is obvious to anyone with half a brain that's been paying attention. And I know you all have at least half one. So, we all know what's going on. When is it going to get fixed? There's an opportunity to do this, get passed. And for all the lectures on political this and political that and insinuations and accusations people want to make about me today, I think everyone should go home and look at the mirror before they go to bed tonight. Thank you very much.
So I just wanted to, because we do have to suspend in about a minute, I just wanted to ask you all, would you like me to circulate the report as it's done so far so that everyone has some time to view it so that we can kind of get going on it? I see some nodding. So I'll email that so that you can take a look at the prorogation report. The other thing is, if we do get through maybe at the beginning of next meeting, disposing of the motions we have before us, like Mr. Blakey said, things are getting tighter and tighter. I thought by the end of this meeting, maybe we get through it all. You should be thinking about recommendations if you do want to move to completing that study. Ideally, what me and the clerk had in mind was if things were to get to that point today, then it would have been nice to have everyone's proposed recommendations in by Friday. So I just wanted to say, of course, you don't have the report, but the report will be sent out to you, and just to have in the back of your minds to start thinking about those recommendations if we do make progress in the next meeting. Is that good?
Sorry, I was just going to say I respect where Daniel's coming. So there's no opportunity to vote right now. We're now calling we're saying. Are we? I'm just wondering are we going to go on a vote on this one? So Daniel's talking about timelines. This is something that's important, and perhaps we have time to vote. I don't know. We already went. Obviously, the 1 o'clock was just 1 o'clock, but it's not really 1 o'clock. And I was very happy that we got through the last vote, and I'm hoping perhaps we can vote then.
It was 1 o'clock. I am having the clerk tell me that, there was a minute here or there. So that's why I was trying to give it to resolve the situation. But now we have, 2 to 3 votes to get through at this point. And I think we'd have to get through them at the beginning of the next meeting. But I think we can. And we will circulate the report to everybody. And hopefully come prepared to vote on all of it, dispose of it, and get started on Thursday's meeting with the report.
With the report, okay.
Yeah. Is that good?
Well, no, that's awesome. I think for us, I'm happy about that report, and I thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Meeting suspended.